Owning a home was supposed to be a dream come true, especially since I had worked tirelessly for years to pay it off completely, ensuring that no bank, lender, or homeowners association (HOA) had any claim over it. But that dream quickly turned into a nightmare when, out of nowhere, a stranger showed up on my doorstep with a moving truck, claiming he had legally purchased my house from the HOA and that I needed to vacate immediately, as if I were some tenant who had overstayed their lease, rather than the rightful, legally documented owner of the property. At first, I thought it was some sort of prank, a misunderstanding, or maybe even a scammer trying to hustle me into signing something I shouldn't. But the man, who introduced himself as Jacob Warren, was disturbingly confident, waving around a thick stack of papers that he claimed were legal documents proving the sale, even as I stood there in complete shock, trying to comprehend how an HOA that I barely even interacted with could have possibly sold a home they didn't own. "I don't know what kind of joke you think this is," I told him, crossing my arms as he stood smugly in my driveway, gesturing for the movers to start unloading boxes, as if I were just going to step aside and let some complete stranger take over the house I had poured my blood, sweat, and tears into for years. "This isn't a joke," Jacob replied with a smirk, flipping through the papers as if he were just waiting for me to give in. "The HOA put this property up for sale due to unpaid association fees and violations, and I won the bid. The deed is already being transferred, so I suggest you pack up whatever you want before I change the locks." The sheer audacity of his words nearly made me laugh. Except I was far too angry to find anything amusing about this situation, especially since I had no outstanding fees, no violations, and certainly no reason for my house to be sold out from under me. "You're out of your mind," I said, snatching the papers from his hands to examine them myself, and sure enough, they were official-looking documents stamped with an HOA seal. But as I read through them, the details didn't add up. The name on the previous owner line wasn't mine, and the so-called violations listed were completely fabricated, referencing things like unauthorized structural changes and failure to maintain community aesthetic standards, which was absurd because not only had I never received a single warning about any of these so-called issues, but my property was in pristine condition, meticulously maintained better than half the homes in the neighborhood. "This is fraud," I said, shoving the papers back at him, my heart pounding as I realized just how deep this went. "The HOA doesn't own my house. They have no legal right to sell it." But Jacob just shrugged, as if he had heard it all before, as if this was something he had done more than once. And that was when a sickening thought crossed my mind. How many other homes had they done this to? "Take it up with the HOA," he said nonchalantly, motioning for one of the movers to start wheeling in a couch toward my front door. "But as far as I'm concerned, I'm the legal owner now, and you need to leave." That was the moment I realized just how serious the situation was, that this wasn't just some mistake or bureaucratic error. It was theft, a full-blown fraudulent sale conducted by an HOA that had clearly overstepped its boundaries, and now I had a complete stranger trying to move into my home like he had every right to be there. But if Jacob thought for even 1 second that I was going to roll over and let this happen, he had another thing coming. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and called the police, my hands shaking with rage as I explained that someone was trying to illegally take possession of my house based on fraudulent claims. And as soon as Jacob realized I wasn't about to back down, his smug expression faltered for the first time, his confidence cracking just enough to reveal the nervous uncertainty beneath. "That won't change anything," he muttered, stuffing the papers back into his folder and stepping away as I stood my ground, making it very clear that no one was stepping foot into my home without facing serious consequences. "We'll see about that," I shot back, my pulse pounding in my ears as I waited for the cops to arrive, knowing that this was just the beginning of what was about to become a war between me, the corrupt HOA, and the man who had so foolishly thought he could steal my house right out from under me. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights cutting through the evening dusk as 2 officers stepped out of their cruiser, one already reaching for his notepad, while the other surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes, immediately picking up on the tense standoff between me and the so-called new homeowner, who was still standing in my driveway, arms crossed. acting as if this were some minor legal dispute rather than an outright attempt at stealing my home. All right, the lead officer, a grizzled man with a name tag that read Sergeant Holloway, said as he adjusted his belt, "Somebody want to tell me what's going on here?" I wasted no time explaining, my voice sharp and unwavering as I laid out exactly what had happened. That I was the rightful owner of this house, that I had paid it off in full, that I had never received any warnings, notices, or foreclosure documents, and yet somehow this stranger had shown up claiming the HOA had sold him my home, armed with a suspiciously official-looking set of documents that, as far as I could tell, were completely fraudulent. Jacob, for his part, had the audacity to roll his eyes and act as though I was the one being difficult, waving his ownership papers around like they were the gospel truth. "Look, officers, I don't know what else to tell you," he said, forcing a fake, exasperated chuckle as he handed over the stack of documents. "I went through all the legal channels. The HOA auctioned off this property due to unpaid fines, and I won the bid. If the previous owner wasn't aware, that's unfortunate, but it's not my fault." My blood boiled at how casual he was about this, how he was standing there in front of my house, in front of the life I had built, treating it like some cheap real estate transaction when it was so much more than that. The officer took the papers and flipped through them, his expression darkening as he scanned the supposed violations, foreclosure notices, and sales agreements, before finally looking back up at me. "You said you never received any notices about fines or foreclosure," he asked, clearly skeptical of the legitimacy of the documents he was holding. "Not a single one," I confirmed, "because there were none. I don't owe the HOA anything. I have proof that my mortgage was fully paid off years ago, and I have 0 outstanding debts." That seemed to give the officer pause, and for the first time, I saw Jacob shift uncomfortably, as if realizing that his plan, or whoever's plan this was starting to fall apart under scrutiny. "All right," Sergeant Holloway said, handing the documents over to his partner, who immediately started taking photos of them. "We're going to have to verify all of this. But if what you're saying is true, then we've got a serious problem." "A criminal problem," I corrected, refusing to let this get brushed off as a simple misunderstanding. Because if the HOA has been illegally seizing and selling homes that aren't theirs to sell, this isn't just about me. It's about every homeowner in this neighborhood who could be at risk of losing their property without even knowing it. That statement clearly rattled Jacob, because he suddenly took a step forward, his voice a little too desperate as he blurted out, "Look, maybe we can come to some kind of arrangement." "An arrangement?" I repeated, narrowing my eyes. "Are you trying to bribe me to let you steal my house?" "That's not," he stammered, but the officers were already looking at him with fresh suspicion, and I knew I had just caught him slipping. "Sir, I'd advise you not to say anything else," the second officer interjected, and I could practically see the moment Jacob realized just how much trouble he was in. "Now, let's take a step back. We're going to need statements from both of you, but in the meantime, no one is moving anything into this house until we verify the ownership records." That was the first victory of the night. Because despite his arrogance, despite his smarmy confidence, Jacob wasn't allowed to take so much as a single step into my home, and the moving truck idled uselessly at the curb as I pulled out my own folder of legal documents, my deed, my mortgage records, my proof that this house was mine and always had been. But the deeper the officers dug into the so-called sale, the worse it got. Because as it turned out, my name wasn't just mysteriously left out of the sale documents. According to the fraudulent records, I had never even existed as the homeowner. My property had been wrongfully relisted under a different name, a non-existent alias that had somehow given the HOA the authority to sell the house, and that was when I knew this wasn't just some random clerical error. It was an organized scheme, one that had been carried out with precision, deception, and a complete disregard for the law. "This goes way beyond one bad sale," the officer murmured as he compared my documents with Jacob's. "If this happened to you, it's probably happened to others." And that was the moment I realized the entire HOA was corrupt. This wasn't just about my home. It was about an entire scam operation designed to push out homeowners and resell their properties under fraudulent circumstances. And now that I had proof, there was no way in hell I was going to let them get away with it. They wanted a fight. They had no idea who they were up against. With the police now fully involved and my lawyer on speed dial, I refused to let the situation die quietly. I was going to make sure that every single person responsible for this fraudulent sale faced legal consequences, and I wasn't stopping until the entire HOA was either dismantled or buried in lawsuits so deep they'd never recover. The next morning, I met with my attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Monica Patel, who immediately saw the potential for a massive civil and criminal case. They falsified documents, attempted illegal property seizure, and potentially defrauded multiple homeowners, she said as she scanned through the paperwork I had collected. This isn't just an HOA overstepping their authority. This is organized real estate fraud. We need to escalate this to a full investigation. And that's exactly what we did. Within days, Monica had filed a lawsuit not only against the HOA but also against Jacob Warren, the so-called buyer, for his involvement in the fraudulent sale. At the same time, she began pushing for a deeper legal review of all property transactions conducted by the HOA over the last 5 years, and what we uncovered was even worse than I had imagined. This wasn't an isolated incident. The HOA had been running an entire legal eviction and resale scheme, targeting homeowners who were either older, single, or less legally savvy, fabricating violations and unpaid dues to claim the houses were in default before quietly selling them to pre-selected buyers who were either in on the scam or willing to ignore the red flags for a cheap deal. It was disgusting, criminal, and about to blow up in their faces. But my case? My case was their biggest mistake yet, because not only was I fully paid off, fully documented, and fully prepared to fight back, but I had something else they hadn't counted on: public exposure. As soon as Monica compiled the evidence, we sent it straight to the local news, and within a week, the story had gone viral. Homeowners Association caught running fraudulent property seizures. Victims speak out. HOA board under investigation for illegal home sales. Local man's paid-off home nearly stolen in HOA scam. It was everywhere. Neighbors started coming forward with their own horror stories, some of them realizing for the first time that they had been victims of similar fraud. The HOA board members, who had once been so smug, so self-assured in their untouchable power, were now scrambling, trying to do damage control, denying everything even as Monica shoved stacks of evidence in their faces. But it was already too late. The investigation had begun. The State Attorney General's office launched a formal probe into every transaction the HOA had made in the last 10 years, and the deeper they dug, the more criminal activity they uncovered: forged signatures, fraudulent liens, and worst of all, a history of harassing and intimidating homeowners into leaving their properties so the HOA could sell them for profit. People were going to prison for this. The first arrest? The HOA president himself. It turned out he had been the mastermind behind the scheme, funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars from illegal home sales into personal bank accounts. And when the forensic accountants went through his records, they found offshore accounts, shell companies, and enough financial fraud to lock him up for decades. Watching him get dragged out of the HOA office in handcuffs was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. But I wasn't done yet, because Jacob Warren, the smug jerk who had tried to steal my home, was also facing serious legal trouble. Not only did he lose every penny he had paid in the fraudulent purchase of my house, but he was also charged with conspiracy to commit fraud after it was revealed that he had knowingly participated in multiple shady real estate deals with the HOA before. He tried to play dumb, tried to act like he had no idea what was going on, but the evidence was stacked against him. He took a plea deal in exchange for testimony against the HOA board, but it didn't save him from financial ruin, because not only did he have to pay back every homeowner he had defrauded, but he was also blacklisted from any real estate transactions for years. As for me, I won my case, and not only did I get my home legally reaffirmed as 100% mine, but the HOA was forced to disband entirely. Every homeowner who had been affected was compensated, either through settlements or direct restitution, and new protections were put in place to prevent this kind of fraud from ever happening again. But the best part, the absolute cherry on top, the final HOA meeting, where my lawsuit officially dismantled them. I stood there in front of what was left of the board, watching as they signed away the power they had so gleefully abused, their faces pale, their shoulders slumped in defeat. Hope it was worth it, I told them, my voice dripping with satisfaction, because you'll be paying for this for the rest of your lives. And with that, I walked out, knowing that not only had I taken down a corrupt HOA, but I had also made sure no one else in this neighborhood would ever be victimized again. The HOA thought they could steal my home. They lost everything instead. And I got the last laugh.